The frozen road. The night was brutal, a relentless winter storm sweeping across the deserted highway. The kind of cold that didn't just chill your skin but clawed its way into your bones. Snowflakes, thick and heavy, tumbled from the sky, blanketing the desolate stretch of road. The headlights of Logan Carter's 18-wheeler cut through the darkness, illuminating the barren trees lining the road. Logan had been driving for hours, keeping himself awake with bad coffee and old rock music crackling through his radio. He had seen just about everything in his years on the road. Car wrecks, desperate hitchhikers, even a couple of ghost stories that made the rounds in trucker circles. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw next. A shadow moved at the edge of his headlights. At first, he thought it was an animal. A deer maybe, or some poor dog that had wandered too far from home. But as he drew closer, a chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a child. A little girl, stumbling barefoot through the snow, her arms wrapped around her small frame as she shivered uncontrollably. Logan slammed on the brakes, his tires skidding against the icy pavement before his rig lurched to a stop. He barely registered the warning lights flashing on his dashboard before he was unbuckling his seatbelt and throwing the door open. The cold hit him like a punch to the gut. The wind howled around him, stinging his face as he ran toward the girl. "Hey," he called out. "Hey kid, are you okay?" She didn't answer. She took one more staggering step before collapsing into the snow. Logan's heart pounded as he reached her, dropping to his knees in the slush. Up close, she was even smaller than she looked. Couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Her dark hair was tangled, matted with dirt, and something else, something sticky and dark. Blood. His stomach twisted. He carefully turned her over, his breath catching when he saw the state she was in. Her oversized sweatshirt was soaked through with fresh red stains. Her tiny hands clutched at her abdomen, where a crude bandage had been wrapped around her middle. It wasn't just a wound. Someone had operated on her. Panic surged in his chest as he placed 2 fingers against her throat. Her pulse was faint, but it was there. She was still alive. "Hang in there, kid," he muttered, sliding one arm under her back and the other beneath her knees. She barely weighed anything, like she hadn't eaten in days. As he carried her toward the truck, she let out the softest whimper. Logan tightened his grip, shielding her from the wind as he hurried back to his cab. He threw open the passenger door and climbed inside, cranking up the heat to its highest setting. He grabbed a spare flannel from the back and draped it over her before reaching for his phone with shaking fingers. 911. The line rang twice before a calm female voice answered. 911. What's your emergency? Logan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. I found a little girl on the side of Highway 16, he said. She's hurt. Bad. She's got fresh stitches, and she's bleeding through them. She needs a hospital now. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Sir, can you confirm her condition? Is she conscious? Barely, Logan said, glancing at her. She was curled against the seat, her breathing shallow, her body trembling. She's ice cold. I don't know how long she's been out there, but it's a miracle she's still alive. There's a hospital about 60 miles from your location, the dispatcher said. Can you transport her? Logan didn't hesitate, already driving. He threw the truck into gear, his tires spinning against the slick road as he pulled back onto the highway. Sir, do you know what happened to her? Logan's grip tightened on the wheel. No, he said, but I sure as hell intend to find out. The chase begins. The hospital came into view after what felt like an eternity. The emergency entrance was lit up against the storm, a beacon of safety in the dark. Logan barely had the truck in park before he was out of the cab, carrying the girl in his arms as he rushed toward the doors. Help! I need help over here, he shouted. A team of nurses and a doctor ran toward him with a gurney. What happened? One of the nurses asked as they lifted the girl onto the bed. I found her on the road, Logan said. She's been cut open, stitched up. I don't know who did it, but they left her for dead. The doctor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, pulled back the girl's sweatshirt. Her expression darkened. "Get her prepped for surgery," she ordered. "Now." As the nurses wheeled the girl away, the doctor turned to Logan. "Where exactly did you find her?" "Off Highway 16, Logan said. "Middle of nowhere." Her gaze narrowed. "And you just happened to be there." Logan felt his temper flare. "I'm a trucker. I drive that highway all the time. You really think I had something to do with this?" The doctor held his gaze for a long moment, then exhaled. "I had to ask." Logan ran a hand over his face. "Look, Doc, whatever's going on here, it's bad. Someone didn't just abandon that kid. They dumped her." The doctor's expression darkened. "That's what I'm afraid of." An unraveling mystery. Logan sat in the hospital waiting room, staring at the wall as his mind raced. This wasn't just a case of a lost kid. Someone had taken that girl, had cut into her, stitched her up like a butchered animal, then left her to die. But why? His thoughts were interrupted when the door swung open. A tall man in his 40s, broad-shouldered with sharp eyes, stepped inside. A badge hung from his belt. "Sheriff Dante Lawson," the man introduced himself. "You the one who brought the girl in?" Logan nodded. Lawson pulled out a notepad. "Tell me everything." Logan went through it again. The highway, the cold, the blood, the stitches. Lawson listened, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he closed his notebook. "We ran a check through the missing persons database," Lawson said. "A 9-year-old girl matching her description, Lily Dawson, was reported missing 6 months ago." Logan's stomach dropped. 6 months. How the hell had she survived this long? And more importantly, who had taken her? Lawson's next words sent a chill through him. "And that's not all," the sheriff said. "Her mother, Olivia Dawson, was declared dead 2 months ago." Logan frowned. "Declared? What do you mean?" "No body was ever found." Logan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Something was very, very wrong. And whatever had happened to Lily Dawson, whoever had taken her, they weren't done yet. Shadows in the ice. The hospital room was too quiet. Logan Carter sat in the corner, arms crossed, watching the unconscious girl lying on the hospital bed. The beeping monitors were steady, a soft rhythm in the silence. Lily Dawson, if that was truly her name, had been stable for the last few hours, her body weak but hanging on. But Logan couldn't shake the unease in his chest. Something wasn't right. The sheriff's words kept ringing in his head. Her mother was declared dead 2 months ago. No body was ever found. That wasn't a coincidence. Logan had seen enough shady business in his time on the road to know when something smelled rotten. Someone had taken this girl, cut her open, and left her for dead. And if they were willing to go this far, it meant one thing. They were coming back. The door to the room creaked open, breaking him from his thoughts. Sheriff Dante Lawson stepped inside, his boots heavy against the tiled floor. "She's still out?" Lawson asked, nodding toward the bed. Logan nodded. "They pumped her full of painkillers. Doc said she's going to be out for a while." Lawson sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. He looked exhausted, like he had already spent the last 12 hours chasing ghosts. "I just got off the phone with missing persons. They confirmed it. Lily Dawson disappeared 6 months ago from a small town about 3 hours from here." "Then why wasn't she reported all over the news?" Logan asked. "She was," Lawson said, flipping open his notepad, "for about 2 weeks. Then it went quiet." Logan's gut tightened. That doesn't just happen. A missing kid. That should have been everywhere. Lawson nodded grimly. "Yeah. And her mother, Olivia Dawson. She was making a lot of noise when Lily first vanished. Started calling every law enforcement agency, the press, even some private investigators. Then, 2 months later, she goes missing too." Logan frowned. and they just wrote her off as dead. They found her car abandoned by a bridge, Lawson said. No sign of a struggle. No body. Suicide, they called it. Logan let out a slow breath, shaking his head. She didn't kill herself. Not a chance in hell, Lawson agreed. I pulled her records. Olivia Dawson was a former investigative journalist. Spent years exposing corruption, corporate fraud, digging into things people didn't want uncovered. A cold realization settled over Logan. So when her daughter vanished, she did what she did best. She dug. Lawson exhaled. Yeah. And then she disappeared too. Logan ran a hand through his hair. This isn't random. Someone's cleaning up loose ends. First the mom, then the kid. And now, Lawson said, lowering his voice, someone tried to erase her again. The sheriff turned toward the sleeping girl, his jaw tightening. Someone cut that kid open, stitched her up, and dumped her on the side of the road like trash. But here's what's bothering me. Logan raised an eyebrow. Just one thing. Lawson gave him a dry look before continuing. If they wanted her dead, why not just kill her? That thought had been gnawing at Logan too. He shook his head. Maybe something went wrong. Maybe they had to dump her before they finished the job. Or maybe, Lawson said, she wasn't supposed to die at all. The two men sat in silence, the beeping of the heart monitor the only sound between them. Then Lawson let out a sharp breath. I've got my guys pulling every scrap of info on Olivia Dawson and whatever she was working on before she vanished, he said. But I need to be straight with you. Logan met his gaze. You found this girl, and that puts you in the crosshairs, Lawson said. Whoever did this, they've got power. Influence. They buried Olivia's case. They erased Lily's disappearance from the news. If they find out she's alive, they'll come to finish what they started. Logan exhaled. Then we don't let them. Lawson nodded. Good, because I have a bad feeling this is just the beginning. The missing time. Hours passed. Logan stayed put, watching over Lily while the hospital staff came and went. At some point, he dozed off in his chair, only to jolt awake when a soft whimper cut through the quiet. His eyes snapped to the bed. Lily was awake. Her dark eyes flickered around the room, unfocused, lips trembling. Logan leaned forward carefully, his voice low and calm. Hey kid, you're safe. She blinked at him. Her small hands clutched at the hospital blanket, and when she spoke, her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. They're coming. Logan felt a chill creep down his spine. Lily swallowed hard, gripping the sheets tighter. They're coming for me. Logan reached for the call button, pressing it. A nurse would be here soon, but for now, he needed to keep her calm. Who, kid? He asked gently. Who's coming? She shook her head, her breathing shaky. The men, the ones who took me. Logan's blood ran cold. Do you remember them? Lily hesitated, then nodded. They wore masks, but I heard them talking. What did they say? She swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. They said I was special. Logan clenched his jaw. That word again. Before he could press further, the door swung open. Dr. Parker, the attending physician, stepped in, followed closely by Lawson. She's awake, Logan said, glancing at the sheriff. Lawson nodded, stepping forward. Lily, sweetheart, I'm Sheriff Lawson. Can I ask you a few questions? Lily's lips pressed together, fear flickering in her eyes. It's okay, Logan assured her. No one's gonna hurt you. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Lawson crouched beside the bed, keeping his voice calm. Lily, do you remember where they took you? She was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, she whispered, the cold room. Logan exchanged a look with Lawson. The cold room, Lawson repeated. Lily nodded. It was dark and cold. They put us in beds, told us to sleep. Logan's stomach turned. Who's us, Lily? Her breath hitched. The other kids. Logan felt like the air had been knocked out of him. There were more. Lawson asked. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Some of them woke up after surgery. Some of them didn't. A heavy silence settled over the room. Logan looked at Lawson. The sheriff's face was unreadable, but his grip on his notepad was tight. "We need to move her," Lawson said abruptly. Dr. Parker frowned. "Move her? Sheriff, she just woke up." Lawson cut her off. "She just said they are coming. That means they know she's alive. That means we don't have time." Logan nodded in agreement. "He's right. We stay here. We're sitting ducks." Parker hesitated but then sighed. "I'll get her discharged, but where are you taking her?" Logan met Lawson's gaze. "Somewhere they won't find her." Because one thing was certain, whoever took Lily Dawson wasn't finished. And this was only the beginning of something much, much bigger. The cold room. The storm had passed, but the air still carried winter's unforgiving bite. Logan Carter's fingers gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale beneath the dim glow of the dashboard. The semi-truck's engine rumbled steadily as he drove down the darkened back roads, away from the city, away from the hospital. Beside him in the passenger seat, Lily Dawson was curled under a heavy flannel blanket. The oversized hoodie he had given her dwarfed her small frame, but she still shivered. Her dark eyes flicked from the road to the side mirror, as if expecting something, someone, to appear from the shadows. Logan didn't blame her. Sheriff Lawson had set them up with a temporary safe house, a small hunting cabin deep in the woods, miles from any main roads or cell towers. "We'll move her again in a few days," Lawson had told him before they left. "Keep things unpredictable." Logan hadn't argued. He didn't like sitting still, and he liked waiting to be hunted even less. Lily stirred beside him. Her voice was small, hesitant. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Logan answered without taking his eyes off the road. She hesitated. "Safe from them." Logan glanced at her. "Yeah, kid." She hugged the blanket tighter, curling into herself. Silence stretched between them before she finally whispered, "They'll find us." Logan clenched his jaw, forcing down the anger that burned in his chest. "Not if I find them first." Lily didn't respond. She only stared out the window as the trees blurred past, disappearing into the endless dark. A ghost in the system. Sheriff Dad Lawson rubbed his temples as he stared at the computer screen in his office. His desk was cluttered with papers, missing persons reports, autopsy files, and documents he wasn't even sure he was allowed to have. But nothing added up. 6 months ago, Lily Dawson had vanished without a trace. Her mother, Olivia Dawson, had pushed for every lead, demanded answers. Then, 2 months later, Olivia had gone missing too, presumed dead, though no body had ever been recovered. And now here was Lily, dumped on the side of a frozen highway, bleeding and barely alive. Something was off. He clicked through the missing persons database, searching for anything connected to Lily's disappearance. But something strange was happening. Every time he pulled up a file, it had been scrubbed. Details were missing. Reports were marked as archived without reason. Someone had gone through the system and erased her. It wasn't just a missing child case anymore. It was a cover-up. Lawson let out a slow breath and picked up his phone. "Detective Mendez," a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Mendez, I need a favor," Lawson said. The detective sighed. "Jesus, Lawson, it's almost midnight. What kind of favor?" "I need access to restricted files," Lawson said. "Off-the-books disappearances. Kids. The kind that don't show up in public records." There was silence on the other end. Then Mendez spoke, his voice quieter. "You're opening a door you might not be able to close. Man. Just send me what you got." Lawson hung up. He had a feeling they weren't just dealing with a kidnapping ring. This was something bigger. And if they didn't figure it out fast, more kids were going to vanish. The safe house. The cabin was small, old, and smelled like dust and damp wood. Logan shut the truck's engine off and stepped out first, scanning the area before motioning for Lily to follow. She hesitated before climbing down, gripping the blanket tightly around her shoulders. The snow was deep, and she struggled to step through it, her legs weak from exhaustion. Logan reached down and lifted her easily, carrying her up the steps. She stiffened but didn't fight him. Inside, the air was warmer, but not by much. Logan dropped his duffel bag on the couch and set Lily down in front of the fireplace. "There's no TV," he said. "No Wi-Fi. No phone signal." Lily pulled her knees up to her chest. "That's good." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Good?" She nodded. "They can't track us if we don't exist." Something about the way she said it sent a chill through him. How much had this kid seen? He grabbed some firewood from the corner and started working on getting a fire going. Lily spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You won't let them take me back, will you?" Logan looked up, meeting her gaze. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was just staring at him with quiet, exhausted certainty. He exhaled. "No, kid. I won't." She finally looked away, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "That's what my mom said, too." Logan's hand stilled over the firewood. He swallowed hard, but he didn't say anything. The cold room. Lily dreamed of the cold. She was back in the dark room, the air heavy with the scent of chemicals. The beds were lined in rows, metal bars pressed against her skin. She could hear the steady beep, beep, beep of machines, the quiet murmurs of voices she couldn't understand. The other kids were there, some asleep, some awake, some. She flinched. They had taken Sarah first, the girl with the freckles. They had wheeled her out, past the door with the red light. She had screamed. Sarah never came back. Lily's breath hitched. Then came the masked man. He stood over her bed, adjusting the tubes in her arm. His face was covered, but his eyes, they were cold. Calculated. "She's next," he had said. Lily wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but she couldn't move. A needle pressed into her arm. The world blurred, and then she was awake. Lily's eyes snapped open. Her body jerked upright, breath coming in quick, sharp gasps. She wasn't in the cold room. She was in the cabin. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace. Logan was asleep in the chair across from her, arms crossed, his breathing slow and steady. She let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand against her racing heart. It was a dream. Just a dream. But the memories felt real. Too real. And then, something outside moved. Lily froze. Her fingers tightened around the blanket as she stared toward the window. Footsteps. Not the wind. Not an animal. Someone was out there. Her stomach clenched in fear. They had found them. She turned to wake Logan, but before she could move, the front doorknob turned. A shadow passed over the window. Lily's breath hitched. They were here. The ones in the dark. The cabin's silence. The world had gone silent. Lily Dawson clutched the blanket tightly around herself, her small fingers trembling as she stared at the cabin door. The doorknob had moved. There was someone outside. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. The only other sound was the slow, steady breathing of Logan Carter, still asleep in the armchair. Lily swallowed hard, her heart hammering. She didn't want to wake him, because if she did, it would make it real. If she woke him, then the bad men were truly here. But then, another noise. The unmistakable crunch of snow beneath boots. She clenched her jaw, trying to force herself to be brave, but fear wrapped around her like an iron chain. The shadows moved again. And then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Lily sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers digging into the fabric of the blanket. The knocks weren't rushed. They weren't panicked. They were patient, like whoever was outside knew there was nowhere to run. She turned, her voice barely a whisper. "Logan." The trucker stirred slightly, brow furrowing. But he didn't wake up. Lily turned back toward the door. Whoever it was, they weren't leaving. Then, another noise. Not from the door. From behind the cabin. A window rattled. The bad men never came alone. Her body tensed, her breath quickening. Then she did the only thing she could. She reached out and shook Logan's arm. He woke instantly. Years on the road, years of sleeping in places where danger lurked, had trained his body to react. His eyes snapped open, his body going still. He didn't ask questions. He just listened. Knock. 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 Logan inhaled slowly, his eyes flicking to Lily's face. He saw the fear. Then, his gaze went to the door. And then to the window. He heard the second sound. He knew. His entire posture changed. He moved carefully, silently, reaching under the chair and pulling out the gun he had kept stashed there. "Get behind the couch," he whispered. Lily obeyed without hesitation. Logan moved to the door, standing slightly to the side, just out of direct sight. Another knock. And then, a voice. Low. Calm. "Open the door, Mr. Carter." Logan froze. They knew his name. He gritted his teeth. "Don't know who you are, but you're knocking at the wrong damn door." A pause. Then the voice spoke again. "No, Mr. Carter, we're exactly where we need to be." Logan's grip on the gun tightened. Lily squeezed her eyes shut. They had found them. The wolves at the door. Sheriff Dante Lawson had never been one to ignore his instincts. And right now, his gut was telling him something was wrong. He sat in his truck, parked on a dirt road about 10 miles from the safe house. The night was cold, dark, and far too quiet. He had checked in with Logan and Lily before they left town. Everything had been fine. But now, something felt off. His phone buzzed. A message. No caller ID. "Your friend is running out of time." Lawson's blood ran cold. He threw the truck into gear and hit the gas, speeding toward the cabin. The breaking point. Back at the cabin, Logan Carter knew time was running out. He could hear them now. Not just the one at the door. There were at least 2 more outside. One near the window. One at the back door. They weren't kicking the door down. They weren't rushing in. They were waiting. Toying with them. Logan wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. He took a slow breath and tightened his grip on the gun. "Who are you?" he called. Silence. Then, the voice spoke again. "You already know, Mr. Carter." Logan clenched his jaw. Yeah, he knew. Whoever these men were, they were part of whatever hell Lily had escaped from, and they wanted her back. Logan exhaled slowly. "You want the kid," he said, voice cold. "That it?" A pause. Then, "She belongs to us." Something snapped in Logan. The rage came fast and hot, burning away every trace of hesitation. He moved before he could second-guess himself. One hand shot up, grabbing the curtain cord. He yanked it hard. The curtain fell away, exposing the man standing on the porch. For one split second, Logan saw him. Black tactical gear, the thick jacket, a mask covering the lower half of his face. But the eyes. Logan knew a killer's eyes when he saw them. And this man had done this before. Logan raised the gun and fired. The gunshot shattered the silence. The man outside jerked back, falling against the porch railing. Chaos exploded. The man at the window cursed. A gun fired, shattering the glass. Logan ducked. "Lily, get down." She was already curled into the tightest ball she could manage behind the couch. Logan fired 2 more shots toward the window, forcing the second man to retreat. Footsteps pounded outside. They were regrouping, trying to find another way in. Logan's mind raced. They were outnumbered, trapped. And then, Headlights. A truck roared up the road. Gunfire erupted outside. Logan knew that sound. A shotgun. Lawson. The cavalry had arrived. A reckoning in the snow. Sheriff Dandy Lawson didn't even wait for the truck to stop before he fired. His first shot tore through one of the masked men, sending him sprawling into the snow. The second man turned, raising his weapon. Lawson dropped him before he could fire. Logan kicked open the cabin door, gun still raised. Lawson saw the bodies. The wreckage. "Everyone okay?" he called. "Kid's fine," Logan said. "Bastards tried to flank us." Lawson's jaw tightened. He pointed his shotgun toward the man still groaning in the snow. "Not all of them are dead." Logan lowered his weapon. The man on the ground was bleeding from the shoulder. Lawson walked up to him, boots crunching against the snow. The masked man looked up. Lawson pressed the shotgun barrel against his chest. "You want to tell me who sent you?" The man smiled, blood dripping from his lips. "You already know, Sheriff." Lawson's stomach twisted. Whoever was behind this. They weren't done. Not yet. But Lawson just nodded and pulled the trigger. The war begins. By the time the sun rose, the bodies had been dealt with. The threat, at least for now, was gone. Logan stood outside the cabin, his gun holstered, staring at the wreckage. He knew what this meant. They had just declared war. Lily stepped beside him, staring at the blood in the snow. She didn't flinch. Logan looked down at her. "They won't stop," she whispered. Logan exhaled. "No," he said. "They won't." But he wasn't running anymore. And he sure as hell wasn't letting them take her back. Whoever these men were, whoever thought they could own this girl, they had just made a mistake. Because Logan Carter was coming for them next. Smoke and silence. The snow was painted red. Sheriff Dandy Lawson stood with his shotgun resting against his shoulder, staring down at the masked man he had just executed. Blood pooled beneath the body, steaming against the cold ground. Logan Carter let out a slow breath, his pulse still hammering from the firefight. The crisp winter air did little to cool the adrenaline surging through his veins. He turned to the sheriff, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek. "That was messy," Logan muttered. Lawson exhaled sharply, keeping his gaze on the bodies. "Yeah, but necessary." From inside the cabin, Lily peeked out from behind the door. Her dark eyes flicked between the fallen men. The blood, the smoking barrels of their weapons. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She had seen worse. That realization settled deep in Logan's chest, making his stomach turn. She wasn't just a survivor. She was someone who had already lost too much. Lawson took a slow step forward, crouching beside the nearest body. He ripped off the man's mask, revealing a rugged face with a jagged scar running down his cheek. His eyes were frozen open, still locked in a permanent vacant stare. Logan recognized the type instantly. Not a street thug. A professional. "These weren't some hired guns off the street," Logan muttered. "This was planned." Lawson nodded, his jaw tightening. "They were waiting. They knew where to find us." Logan's fingers curled into fists. "That means someone leaked our location." Lawson exhaled through his nose, standing up and running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Or they've been tracking us since the hospital." He glanced at Lily. "They want her back." Logan's gut twisted. Not wanted. Owned. That's what they thought, anyway. But Logan wasn't about to let that happen. The interrogation. One of the men was still alive. Barely. He was slumped against the side of the cabin, blood seeping from a bullet wound in his side. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead as his breath came in ragged gasps. Lawson crouched in front of him, flipping open his pocket knife. He held it up casually, watching the blade catch the early morning light. "I've got about 5 minutes before you bleed out," the sheriff said. "Maybe less if you don't start talking." The man let out a wet chuckle, coughing up blood. "You don't have the balls." Lawson didn't hesitate. He pressed the knife deep into the man's wound and twisted. The bastard screamed. Logan didn't flinch. Neither did Lily. The girl just stood there, watching silently, her small hands curled into the fabric of her hoodie. Lawson leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous. "Now you listen to me, you son of a bitch. I know you're just the muscle. You're not the one giving the orders. So tell me who is." The man gritted his teeth, shaking as pain racked his body. But then, he smirked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he whispered. Logan stepped forward, looming over him. "Then educate us." The man spat blood onto the snow. His eyes flicked to Lily. "She was never supposed to get away," he rasped. "But it doesn't matter. You think you saved her. You think you won." He let out a ragged breath. "You just made yourselves the next targets." Lawson scowled. "Who's behind it?" The man gave a weak, breathy laugh. "You think I'd still be breathing if I knew." His head lolled slightly, blood dripping from his mouth. "You're too late. They've already moved the rest." Logan's heart kicked up. The rest. More children. "Where?" Lawson demanded, grabbing the man's collar. "Where are they?" But the bastard just grinned. And then, before Lawson could react, he bit down, hard. His eyes bulged, veins in his neck tightening as foam bubbled from his lips. His body convulsed violently for a few seconds before going limp. Poison. He had offed himself. Lawson swore, dropping him. "Goddamn it." Logan clenched his jaw. They were dealing with something bigger than a trafficking ring. This was an organization, and they were willing to kill their own just to keep their secrets. The cold room files. They buried the bodies. Neither Logan nor Lawson wanted to stick around long enough for someone else to come looking. Once the blood was covered by snow, they got back inside the cabin. Logan sat at the table, rubbing his temples. Lily sat across from him, silent, her fingers tracing patterns in the wood. Lawson pulled out his phone, dialing a number. "Detective Mendez," a groggy voice answered. "We need a name," Lawson said. There was a pause. "You got something?" Lawson glanced at Lily before answering. "We had visitors." "Shit," Mendez muttered. "You okay?" "For now," Lawson said, but one of them spilled something before he swallowed cyanide. Mendez was silent. Then, what did he say? Logan answered this time. That Lily wasn't the only one. Another pause. Then Mendez exhaled sharply. "Damn it. I had a feeling this was bigger than just her." Lawson leaned against the wall, his voice cold. "Tell me what you know." A click of keys on a keyboard. Then Mendez spoke. "There's been whispers. Places called cold rooms." Logan stiffened. Lily had used that exact phrase. "What are they?" Logan asked. Mendez hesitated. Then his voice dropped. "They're facilities. Places where kids are taken before they're sold. Or worse." Lily flinched. Logan's fists tightened. "How many?" Mendez sighed. "We don't know. Could be dozens, could be hundreds, spread out across the country. The people behind this, they're connected. Government agencies, hospitals, private security firms." He let out a bitter laugh. "Hell, you ever wonder why some of the richest people in the world never seem to be on organ transplant waitlists?" Logan's stomach turned. He knew the world was corrupt. But this was evil. Lawson's voice was steel. "We need to find them." "I'll do some digging," Mendez said. "But be careful, Lawson. These people, they don't just kill their problems. They erase them." Lawson hung up. The room was heavy with silence. Lily looked up. "There were more," she said softly. Lawson and Logan turned to her. She swallowed hard. "Kids. Like me." Her voice wavered. "Some of them didn't wake up." Logan closed his eyes, forcing down the anger clawing at his chest. Lawson ran a hand down his face. "We can't just sit on this." "No," Logan agreed. "We can't." The men who took Lily weren't just criminals. They were part of a machine. A system designed to take children, carve them up, and make them disappear. Logan had spent his whole life staying out of trouble. But now it was personal. "We go hunting," Logan muttered, standing up. Lawson nodded. "Damn right we do." Lily clutched the blanket around herself. "They won't stop." Logan looked at her. "Neither will we." Because now, they weren't running. They were going to war. Beneath the surface, a war in the dark. The snow-covered forest stretched for miles in every direction, vast and empty under the dull glow of a half-moon. The cabin sat in its heart like a lone sentinel, its wooden walls worn by time and weather. To the outside world, it looked abandoned, just another forgotten piece of the wilderness. But inside, a war was brewing. Logan Carter stood near the window, staring out into the night, his jaw clenched. His breath fogged the glass as he exhaled, his thoughts running wild. Across the room, Sheriff Dan Lawson sat at the dining table, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. They had spent the last few hours digging through the information Lawson's contact, Detective Mendez, had sent them. Files on missing children, classified reports, whispers of underground facilities called cold rooms where people like Lily had been kept. It was bigger than they had imagined. It was worse than they had feared. And now, it was personal. Logan's fingers curled into fists. He had always lived by a simple rule: keep your head down. Don't get involved in things you can't fix. But this wasn't something he could ignore. Not after what he had seen. Not after what had been done to Lily. The girl sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in the thickest blanket they could find, her tiny fingers gripping the edges like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. She hadn't spoken much since the attack. Not that Logan could blame her. She had already survived one nightmare. Now she was waiting for the next. Lawson ran a hand through his hair. "All right," he muttered, glancing at Logan. "We need a new plan." Logan exhaled sharply. "No kidding." Lawson leaned forward, pointing at the screen. "Mendez confirmed it. This isn't just some low-level organ trafficking ring. It's an operation. There's a system in place." He tapped a map. "They move kids through different locations, safe houses, abandoned hospitals, warehouses. But the real nightmare starts in the cold rooms." Logan narrowed his eyes. "Where?" Lawson let out a bitter laugh. "That's the problem. The locations keep changing. The one Lily was in, probably already cleared out by now." Logan turned to Lily. "Kid," he said gently, "you said there were other kids in that place, right?" She nodded slowly. Logan crouched beside her. "Do you remember anything else? Anything that might help us?" Lily's fingers tightened around the blanket. "It was underground," she whispered. "No windows, just walls. And it smelled like metal." Logan exchanged a look with Lawson. A basement. Maybe a bunker. Maybe worse. Lily swallowed hard. "I heard them talking," she said, her voice barely audible. "They said a new group was coming soon. They said they needed more." Logan's blood turned ice cold. Lawson muttered a curse under his breath. "So it's still active." Logan exhaled sharply. "Then we find them before they move again." Lawson's eyes darkened. "And we burn it to the ground. The hunt begins." The next morning, they were already on the move. Logan and Lawson had left the cabin before dawn, heading into town to meet Mendez at a small diner just off the interstate. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 50 years. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, the smell of cheap coffee in the air. Mendez was waiting for them in a back booth, a thick manila folder sitting in front of him. His dark eyes flicked up as they approached, his expression grim. "You're lucky I don't like sleep," Mendez muttered, pushing the folder toward Lawson. Lawson slid into the booth and flipped it open. Logan took the seat across from him, scanning the pages. Inside were photos, grainy, black and white surveillance images of unmarked vans pulling into loading docks, security footage of masked men escorting children into nondescript buildings. And then, a map. Red circles marked locations across the state. This is where they've been moving their product, Mendy said. The bigger circles, those are cold rooms we suspect are still active. He exhaled. One of them is just 2 hours from here. Logan's jaw tightened. Then that's where we go. Mendy shook his head. You don't just walk into a place like this, Carter. These people, they don't operate alone. They have security, inside men, even law enforcement in their pocket. Lawson tapped the map. We've got the advantage of surprise. Mendy sighed. It won't be enough. Logan met his gaze. Then we bring hell with us. Infiltrating the cold room. They arrived at the location just after nightfall. It was an old factory, long abandoned, its broken windows covered with rusted metal sheets. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten relic of a bygone era. But inside was something much darker. Logan and Lawson moved carefully through the shadows, dressed in dark clothing, their weapons loaded. They had done their research. There were at least 6 armed men patrolling the area. More inside. Lawson pulled out a pair of binoculars, scanning the perimeter. There, he whispered. South entrance. 2 guards. Logan nodded. I'll take the left. Lawson smirked. Guess that means I get the right. They moved fast. Logan closed the distance before the guard even saw him coming. He grabbed the man from behind, wrapping an arm around his throat and squeezing. The man struggled for a few seconds before going limp. Lawson wasn't as subtle. His silencer coughed once. The second guard dropped without a sound. They dragged the bodies into the shadows, then slipped inside. The air was thick with the stench of chemicals, and something far worse. Metal tables lined the far wall. Medical equipment. Surgical tools. Blood-stained floors. Logan's stomach twisted. This wasn't a warehouse. It was a slaughterhouse. A voice echoed from deeper inside. They're moving the shipment tonight. Logan and Lawson exchanged a look. Shipment. Children. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. As they rounded a corner, Logan caught a glimpse of the nightmare unfolding before them. Cages. Dozens of them. And inside, children. Some awake. Some too weak to move. A cold rage settled into Logan's chest. These weren't just criminals. They were monsters. Lawson's voice was tight. We end this. Now. Logan didn't hesitate. He raised his gun. And fired. Blood and fire. The first shot shattered the silence. The second sent one of the guards sprawling. Logan moved like a force of nature, taking down anything that stood in his way. Lawson was right beside him, his shotgun roaring as the facility erupted into chaos. Alarms blared. Shouts filled the air. Logan didn't stop. He fought through the corridors, through the guards, through the smoke and blood. And then, the cages. He ran to them, yanking at the locks. It's okay, he told the children. We're getting you out. Some were too weak to respond. Others stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. Lawson grabbed bolt cutters from a nearby table and snapped the locks open. The children spilled out, weak and shaking. And then, a gunshot. Logan turned. A man stood at the far end of the room. No mask. No fear. Just cold, empty eyes. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. Logan aimed. Yeah, he said. I do. He pulled the trigger. The man dropped. Logan exhaled sharply, then turned back to the children. They were safe. For now. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because now Logan Carter wasn't just fighting to keep Lily safe. He was fighting to destroy every last one of these bastards. And he wouldn't stop until every cold room burned. The war we didn't start. A new dawn. A new battle. The sun was rising. But it wasn't a sunrise to be celebrated. Thick plumes of smoke still rose from the burning warehouse behind them. The smell of blood, fire, and death mixed in the crisp morning air. creating a scent Logan Carter knew he'd never forget. Children huddled together in the snow, wrapped in blankets Sheriff Dad Lawson had grabbed from the van they had stolen. Their faces were pale, their bodies weak, their expressions lost. They were free, but they weren't safe. Not yet. Not ever. Logan crouched in front of a little boy who looked no older than 6. His cheeks were hollow, his lips cracked, his arms thin. The kid didn't cry. He just stared up at Logan with wide, empty eyes. "You're gonna be okay," Logan murmured, not knowing if it was a promise or a lie. The boy nodded, but there was no belief in his face. Logan clenched his jaw and stood, exhaling as he turned to Lawson. "We need to get them out of here before more of those bastards show up." Lawson, still gripping his shotgun, nodded grimly. "We can't take him to a hospital. Not yet. If these people have contacts in law enforcement, they'll be looking for anyone who survived." Logan looked back at the kids. Some of them were barely able to stand, their legs trembling under their own weight. Others were older, some teens, each of them bearing silent scars on their faces. "We'll take him somewhere safe first," Logan said. Lawson gave him a sharp look. "And where the hell is safe, Carter?" Logan didn't have an answer, because he knew the truth. There was no safe place, not until the people who had done this were buried 6 feet under. Lily's warning. Lily Dawson stood by one of the burning vans, watching the flames flicker in the morning light. She had been quiet since they escaped the warehouse. Too quiet. Logan walked up to her, standing beside her. "You all right, kid?" She hesitated, her small hands gripping the oversized hoodie she wore. "They're going to come back." Logan exhaled. "I know." "No," she whispered, finally looking up at him. "You don't understand." Her dark eyes, hollow from months of terror, bore into him. "They don't just take kids," she said. "They erase them." Logan frowned. "What do you mean?" Lily swallowed hard. "The ones who didn't wake up. I heard them say they were remade." Logan's stomach turned. "Remade how?" Lily looked down at the snow, her small fingers curling into fists. "They don't just take organs," she whispered. "They change people. They turn them into something else." Logan's blood ran cold. "What the hell does that mean, Lily?" She shivered. "I don't know. But they said they were making us better." Lawson joined them, overhearing the last part of the conversation. "Better," he repeated, eyes narrowing. Lily nodded. "They weren't just cutting us open. They were testing us. Drugs. Needles. Experiments." Logan's fists clenched. This wasn't just organ trafficking. This was something darker, something deeper. Lawson ran a hand down his face. "Jesus Christ." Logan turned to him. "This goes beyond selling body parts." Lawson nodded. "Yeah." He exhaled sharply. "We're dealing with something much worse." A whispered name. They loaded the children into the stolen van, keeping to back roads, moving fast. Lawson drove. Logan sat in the back with the kids, keeping watch. Lily sat beside him, her small fingers curled around the hem of his jacket. She hadn't let go since they left. As they sped down the deserted highway, Logan pulled out the burner phone Mendes had given them. He dialed the number. The detective answered immediately. "Mendes," Logan said, "we need somewhere safe for these kids." A pause. Then, "I'll see what I can do." Logan hesitated and asked, "Have you ever heard the phrase they were remade?" The line went silent. Logan frowned. "Mendes." The detective inhaled sharply. "Where did you hear that?" Logan glanced at Lily. "From one of the kids." Mendes' voice dropped to a whisper. "You need to get out. Now." Logan's pulse quickened. "What the hell are you talking about?" "There's a name," Mendes said. "A name that keeps coming up in cases like this. A name that's been buried in every official record I've tried to pull." Logan tightened his grip on the phone. "Who?" Mendes exhaled. Then, in a low voice, he said, Dr. Elias Whitmore. Silence filled the van. Logan glanced at Lawson. The sheriff met his gaze, his expression unreadable. They had heard the name Whitmore before. Silas Whitmore had been a powerful man, a billionaire connected to black market organ trade. They had taken him down weeks ago. But this wasn't Silas. This was someone else. And Logan had the sickening feeling that Elias Whitmore was far worse. The ghost who walks among us. They drove for hours, taking every back road possible, avoiding major highways. By the time they reached the hideout Mendes had arranged, the sky was dark again. An abandoned motel, long forgotten. The air smelled of mold and old wood. But it would keep them hidden. Lawson stayed outside, keeping watch, while Logan helped the children settle inside. He didn't sleep. None of them did. And then, just before dawn, the burner phone buzzed. Logan grabbed it, his heart pounding. He answered. But it wasn't Mendes. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled. "You've taken something that belongs to us." Logan's blood went cold. His fingers curled around the phone. "Go to hell." A soft chuckle. "Mr. Carter," the voice said smoothly, "you don't understand the world you've stepped into." Logan gritted his teeth. "Then explain it to me." Another pause. Then, "Dr. Whitmore has been watching you." A beat of silence. And then, "He's impressed." Logan's skin crawled. "I don't give a damn what he thinks," Logan growled. "You will," the voice said, "because sooner or later you'll realize." Another pause. Then, in a whisper, "She was never meant to escape." Logan's breath hitched. Lily. They weren't just hunting her. She was part of something bigger. And now they were coming to take her back. Logan clenched his jaw. His voice was steady when he answered. "Tell your boss something for me." Silence. Logan exhaled sharply. "I'm coming for him first." Then he hung up. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he had to do. Because now it was a war. And Logan Carter didn't plan on losing.